she threatened to tell the wife. This is the usual story. Once you threaten to tell the wife, you know what happens. The man goes bonkers. He wants to keep his affair to himself. So what he did was that he killed her and then packed her body parts. He killed her in her house, and then packed the 7 parts, if I'm not wrong, cut into 7 parts, and packed it into cardboard boxes, and then dumped it into the river near Kallang Clarke Quay, the Parliament House. So there were a lot of body parts that were found along the river. So how did forensic science come in to connect Leong to all these body parts? Now, okay, so what happened was that when police went to the house, they found all this evidence. They found, you can see the chopper, they found a roll of tape, newspaper, the bicycle, the sandals, the pail, the green bags, and then the tape with the hair. So all these were evidence that were found at the crime at Leong's flat.
No, it's 4+.
Okay, so there was also blood in the toilet. So you can see that there were 2 red pails. The toilet walls had blood. There were, on the red cloths, there were blood. The back of the toilet bowl had blood. The sides of the leaf also had blood. So the blood, of course, matches Liu Hongmei, and of course we know that then that she was evidently in the flat, and they found that there were metal pieces from the body, and they found in the kitchen the chopper. Remember, I showed you the chopper. There was a dent in the chopper, all right, and the dent in the chopper, you can see matches. You can see that chopper from the body on the left. You can see the slide. It matches the contour, and not only the contour matches, but the macroscopic marks you can see on the right side. Actually, they are all aligned. So you can see that this fragment that was found on the body matches the chopper, that dent in the chopper. That means when he was chopping her body, that piece fell off and lodged into her body. And as such, there was this matching of the chopper in the house with the piece found in the body. So that's another piece of evidence. And the newspaper was used to wrap the victim's head. So her head that was chopped off, right? The newspaper was used to wrap, and they found that the newspaper from the house, what he did was that he tore off a piece, all right? From, the newspaper normally is 2 pieces, it's this way. So he tore off one side. So the edges of the piece from the house matched the edge of the piece of the newspaper that was used to wrap the victim's head. So you can find that there was again matching. And then they also found on the shoes, the sandals, soil and materials that were also found at the river banks where the body parts were disposed of, right? And how was the linkage established? How did forensic science link Leong to the crime? Right, the blood in the basket, okay, it was matches Liu's DNA, right? So that means Liu was in his flat. You can see the, of course, the pail I mentioned. The chopper also matched, so that means the chopper was used to kill her, right? The newspaper was used to wrap, newspaper found on the flat. Plastic bags, they can only say similar, they can't say really matching, because it is not, plastic bags are not unique, unless, there is a unique type of bag. Otherwise, you can only say that they are similar, right? Masking tape, unfortunately, was not similar, but the sandals, the soil that was found there was consistent with the soil that was found and on Leong's sandals. Therefore, the judge found that Leong Xiu-chong was guilty of murder based on all the forensic scientific evidence that linked him to the crime, right? And what he found was that Leong likely strangled her from behind and then basically chopped her parts. So it is quite a sad case because, it's like what the judge says, Liu came from China, trying to make a living, unfortunately died a very cruel death, being cut into pieces by Leong, who only stole her heart, but stole her hard-earned livings and also robbed her of her life. Okay, so this is how forensic science helps, right, in proving a case in court. So, as I mentioned, forensic evidence really is a form of expert opinion evidence. It is expert because it's a specialized skill, right? All scientists possess a specialized skill. And this specialized skill is used to present evidence in court. Why is it an opinion? It is an opinion because at the end of the day, what are the facts that the expert rely on, and how he reads those facts. So, for example, in this case, the chopper, these are facts, right? And how he linked, for example, the fragments and all. So he is giving an opinion, right? He's giving an opinion that, look, the chopper is used to kill the girl, right? Because of the fragment. Now, don't forget that opinions can, different experts can give different opinions on the same piece of evidence. So it could be that, for example, the prosecution's experts say the chopper is used to kill her, but the defense may find another expert who says that, look, it may not be the same chopper, because, or it could be that there are a lot of choppers that are the same with similar so-called striations, on markings or whatever on this kind of chopper. Maybe it has got, like maybe Japanese choppers, it has got lines that go across this way and whatever. So it's not unique enough, and therefore they can challenge the experts, say, from the other side. So it's really an opinion against an opinion. So this is something to bear in mind. Now, so forensic evidence for an expert at a semester, the proof matters of specialized knowledge. So what you possess when you become a scientist is specialized knowledge, right? And it is so specialized that the court cannot reach a conclusion without being assisted. So that is the real test of what is expert opinion evidence. Now, so very quickly, this evidence can be found in the expert opinion evidence can be found in the Evidence Act. So you just read through. Basically, this is like what I say, it is a person with specialized skill to comment on scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge, right? And these are what we call relevant facts. And I explained earlier to you, relevant facts can be admitted in court. Now, so in 2012, there were certain amendments to allow the court to bring in expert opinion, right? Even though the expert opinion is a matter of common knowledge. I'll explain a bit more about that later. So these are just to enable the court to bring in more evidence for it to consider. Okay, let me just show you a bit. Now, okay, this is what I've explained. Furnish the court with scientific information and knowledge. All right, so this is something I've explained. So for pathologists, their opinion was the injury sufficient in the ordinary cause and nature of the cause there? Document examiner, is the handwriting matches that of the accused? Fingerprint analyst, does the print match the accused fingerprints? Blood pattern, crime scene reconstruction, does the crime scene, the so-called, the way the pattern or the blood is sprayed, say, at the crime scene, does it match, say, the way the accused described himself as having killed the person? Because, for example, if he describes as having killed the person while the person is kneeling, you will expect the spray of blood to be in a certain direction or formation on the wall, right? So these are how the analyst can explain that, yes, it matches because the way it's sprayed is the way the accused described how he chopped the person when he's kneeling on the ground. So these are questions that are normally asked. Now, okay, so the duty of an expert. Now, it is important to remember that the expert must be independent of the party calling him and what we call pressures of the litigation. Under the rules of the Supreme Court, it is the duty of the expert to assist, and also it overrides any obligation to the person from whom he has received instructions or by whom he is paid. Now, this is the usual so-called statement that an expert must give, all right, when he gives a professional opinion in court, that his primary duty is to the court and not the person from whom he has received instructions or by whom he is paid. Now, for experts, the common problem that the court finds is what we call the hired gun kind of a syndrome. You know what's a hired gun, right? Hired gun is you pay me money, I will shoot whoever you want me to shoot. So that's what is called hired gun. So the common complaint is that some experts, if you pay them enough money, they will say whatever you want to say. 1 + 1 = 11. That kind of statement rather than 1 + 1 = 2. So the hired gun syndrome is a very serious problem, and experts are constantly reminded that, look, your primary duty is to the court, to the truth, and not, you should not tailor your opinion in order to fit, the person who pays you. So that is a very important duty. Like I mentioned, opinions, different experts can give different opinions from the same, piece of evidence, or from the series of evidence in court. So his opinion must be well-grounded, well-based, and not be so-called affected by the fact that somebody is paying him. So that's very important. Now, so look at this. This is what the court says. This is a very overriding duty. Okay, it must be cogent, reliable, and gainfully used. Now, so just to give you one example of what happened is that in this case called Hannah Ho, Dr. Lee, who's a psychiatrist, okay, admitted that he amended the report and included a statement that this Hannah was not currently using illegal substance because he wanted to, in his psychiatric report, put forward a narrative that the appellant was a good person. So if you want to say that somebody is a good person, then you can't include a statement that she's using illegal substance when she was actually using. So he was actually putting in something that's not correct. So it was, then the court says, of course, it was incumbent on him as an expert, all right, to include the fact that she was, basically include the fact that she was actually using illegal substance when this is so, right? So that the court can have the full facts before it to give its opinion. So this is something that is very important. Do not give evidence just because you want to tailor it to favor the accused person. Now, what are the principles in admitting Okay, now, in admitting expert evidence, what does the court look at? The court looks at whether the subject matter is appropriate for expert testimony. The next question it asks is the expert qualified? And then the last question is the expert's testimony reliable? So these are questions that the court will ask, right, in determining whether the evidence that is being produced is useful for the court to rely on. So let's look at the first subject. Is the subject matter appropriate for expert testimony? Now, just to repeat this, expert evidence, there's this thing called a common knowledge rule. Expert evidence is only admissible to furnish the court with scientific information outside the experience and knowledge of a judge. So if on the facts, a judge can form his opinion with the help, the opinion of an expert is unnecessary. So this is what is called a common knowledge rule. That means if something that is so common out there, I don't need an expert to tell me because I can decide even without this so-called expert, right? So I can form a conclusion without an expert. So this is the common knowledge rule. Then expert evidence cannot be admitted. Yeah. So for example, the question is whether the accused knew or suspected that he was carrying drugs. So in this particular case, which I earlier, this case called Choi Kui Pang, okay, by C.J. Yong. This case, the expert tried to argue that the accused was of a low IQ of 79. That means because of the low IQ, he was predisposed to be simple-minded, naive, shallow, and therefore he basically only followed instructions. So his opinion is that he should not be held liable because all he does is he has got such low IQ that he just basically follow whatever Peter tell him to do, right? Carry the drugs, go drug trafficking, therefore he just does it, right? So basically the court says, look, no, this is a fact-finding process. Whether he trafficked, whether he has sufficient mental knowledge, mental capacity, it is something that is within the province of the court, and you don't need an expert to come to court and say, just because your IQ of 79, right, therefore you cannot, you don't possess any mental capacity to so-called be able to decide whether to carry drugs or not. So that means you don't have the mental state. So this is what we call a common knowledge rule. Now in England, in this case called R.V. Turner, the English Court of Appeal held that the jury did not need assistance on the issue of how the defendant was likely to react to his girlfriend confessing to be unfaithful, because this was a matter within ordinary human experience. So basically, sometimes what they do is, the defense does is that, for example, if let's say a man is charged with causing grievous hurt to the girlfriend, right? He will try to argue that it was done under what we call grave and sudden provocation. Now, grave and sudden provocation, if you can prove it, it excuses your conduct. That means if you chop your girlfriend, right, and it was due to grave and sudden provocation, you will not be guilty. So what sometimes they do is they will try to get an expert to come to court and say, look, because she told me that she was sleeping with my good friend Mark, therefore I was so upset, so angry, that I was so provoked that I chopped him up. And the psychiatrist will say that this is something that's because of that, the accused acted under grave and sudden provocation. So the court says basically, no, you don't need an expert to tell you how a person reacts when a girlfriend confesses. You don't need an expert to say all this. You can simply, it is common knowledge, how a guy would react, okay, to a girlfriend who says that she's been sleeping around with other men. And the court can then decide whether, firstly, just because the girlfriend says that she was sleeping around with other men, is it grave enough? Is it sudden enough to cause him to lose control of himself that he acted the way he did? So this is something the court says we don't need experts. Okay. Now in Connie So Yuan Quen, as you can see this. So similarly, they try to call a psychiatrist to say that the defendant was not rash when she threw items down, that she did not have the mens rea of rashness. And the court basically said, whether a person is rash when she threw things down, it is for the court to look at the surrounding facts. You don't need a psychiatrist to come to court and tell the court, that she's not rash because she was laboring under certain minor conditions, not severe enough. So I think, this is what the court always says, the common knowledge rule, that something that is common, something that the court can decide without experts, we don't need experts. Now, so it was, so I think you can see that just a few more cases, right? These evidence are not necessary when the court can decide on its own without the need of an expert. Now, what I told you earlier, these are what we call the common knowledge rule. This common knowledge rule in 2012 has been abolished. Section 47.3, let me just show you again. In 2012, it was amended 47.3. The opinion of experts shall not be irrelevant merely because the opinion or part thereof relates to a matter of common knowledge. So what it means now is that even if the matter is one of common knowledge, you can still introduce the court, but whether the court will give weight is a separate matter. So basically what it means is that all those earlier cases I mentioned to you, all right, the court can now, for example, this thing about IQ evidence, this thing about getting psychiatrists to come in, the court can still hear evidence, right? Even though it's a matter of common knowledge, but generally the experience is that if it's of common knowledge, then the weight given to all this evidence is very low, right? So the idea, I think the purpose is that the court wishes to have as much evidence as it can to be presented, and then to hear both sides argue on this evidence, and then let the court decide whether it is something that is weight should be given. So whether it is common knowledge or not, the court says it's fine. Just make sure that when you introduce the evidence, firstly, of course, it must be cogent, right? If you're going to say, for example, that a person of IQ 79 cannot possess the mental capacity to say traffic drugs because he just simply follow people, then you make sure that when that evidence is given, it is supported by empirical evidence or it is supported by literature to show that people of say that low IQ cannot do certain things. So basically the court is saying, never mind, just introduce, but we will weigh based on how convincing you are able to present this type of evidence to the court, right? So this is an expansion of allowing more evidence to come into court. Okay, so the more important question now really is whether the evidence is reliable. So this is something I will touch subsequently. Yeah? So let's look at the next question. Is the expert qualified? So this is the other question. You want to introduce an expert, whether it's a forensic scientist or any psychiatrist or anybody you want. The question is he qualified? Now, how does the court decide? Now, competency of an expert is for the court to decide. Yeah? There need not be by special study. Experience may be sufficient. So an expert does not have to say have a PhD in a certain study in order to be called an expert. So even if let's say it is somebody who through experience has got possessed this special skill, he can still testify. So for example, a doctor can testify as to heroin withdrawal symptoms. So if let's say that you don't need to have a PhD in heroin withdrawal symptoms in order to testify how a drug trafficker reacts or what are the symptoms when he suffers withdrawal symptoms. So this you can just have say a doctor who has been observing drug consumers who have been taking a lot of drugs. He has been observing how they react, or what is the withdrawal symptoms, or how much drugs a person takes before he starts having withdrawal symptoms. So even a doctor like that can testify without having a PhD or a special certificate. So I think that's the you can see the important factor that the court considers. So another, these are some experience, there's some cases. Lim Chuan Huat, we have a doctor who always goes to hospital and observe so-called accused persons who suffers from heroin addiction. So the defense tried to argue that 60 sachets that was found on his body were for his own consumption. Now, as you all know, that drug trafficking above a certain amount carries the death penalty. So, for example, 15 grams of heroin, you get death penalty. So, if you're found with a lot of sachets of drugs, say heroin, on a person, the accused person always try to argue that, oh, I consume it, I didn't traffic it, I didn't want to traffic it. So if I don't traffic it, then it would not carry the death penalty. So what happens is that then evidence normally comes in, right, from doctors to say whether, is it possible that a person can take 60 sachets in say a week, or, if let's say he observed him in a prison over the 1 week and finds that, look, his withdrawal symptoms is so mild, there's hardly any withdrawal symptom. It's not likely that this guy is a heavy daily user of drugs, right? So it's not likely that the 60 sachets are actually for his own use. So this is how this kind of evidence can also come in, and experience is good enough. You don't need special certificates or special so-called academic qualifications. Okay, so this is also another factor the court considers. They prefer experts with longer clinical experience rather than academics. So if you call somebody who is a surgeon, to court to testify, who has been conducting surgery a day in, day out, compared to a doctor who's academic, a doctor who teaches in university to give evidence, then obviously the surgeon, weight will be given more to the surgeon who has got longer clinical experience. Now, okay, this is the important part. Is the expert testimony reliable? So after we have gone through the first part, is it a subject matter? Subject matter is not so important now, like I mentioned, less reliance now given. Now it is more on reliability of the testimony. Yeah, this is something which the court looks more at rather than the first issue or subject matter. Now, so reliability, what does the court look at? The court look at these principles. Are the scientific principles sound? Were the tests done properly? Is the interpretation of the results sound? Are there alternative hypotheses available? Right. So these are the principles that the court will look at when assessing the evidence of an expert. So, like I said, as I run through some of the cases, different experts can come to a different conclusion based on the same facts. Now, all right, this one is, I don't think you need to really go into it. This is actually more for law students. Okay, so basically, if it's a novel scientific method, then the test that's so far currently used in overseas, and especially the United States, is whether the underlying principles are accepted by the scientific community. So if you have a new novel scientific method to say test whether a certain piece of evidence will connect to a certain offender, is a new method, then it has to be generally accepted by the scientific community. So things like use of polygraph tests. Polygraph tests, that was back in the early 1920s. It was not generally accepted. Polygraph tests at one time, it was in its infancy. They started having this polygraph test equipment, and then they started coming out with the argument that they can use these lie detectors to determine whether a person is lying when he says certain things in court. So it was generally at that point in the 1920s not accepted that these tests are reliable. Now, even up to today, the court will not accept polygraph tests for criminal cases, because if polygraph tests were accepted, then really you don't need judges, because if the lie detector can say, look, did you commit a crime? And the guy says, I did not commit a crime, and the lie detector say you're lying, then what will happen? Then obviously I don't need any other evidence. I just need that lie detector to show that, to prove that he's guilty, and that can't be it, because it's quite unacceptable that just the lie detector can accurately determine whether a person is lying or not. So I mean, it may be useful for other purposes, like whether asking him whether you're having an affair or not. I mean, things like that, not so crucial to the issue. But an issue like whether you commit the crime, the court is not going to prepare to give weight to this kind of test, right? Okay, so similarly, in the later as science developed, the test in the US now is really the scientific test must have been subjected to significant testing, generally accepted, whether error rates, and then whether there has been peer review. So some of these are so-called principles to ensure that a novel scientific method that is being introduced in court must be reliable. Then to be reliable, you need to satisfy all these requirements. So that shows how much the court wants to make sure that, if you want to introduce a new novel scientific method in court, you better make sure that it is sound, right? Sound as in satisfying all these tests. Okay, now this is an interesting case. Somebody tried to introduce this very novel method of what we call ear print matching. Okay, never heard of it. I don't think you have heard of it. It's not in Singapore, it's only in this case is in UK. So what happened was that they found an ear print right on the window of the victim's place, right? And they tried to argue that the ear print, matches the ear loop of the accused person, and that was what the prosecution did. They tried to argue it matches. But later, the DNA analysis came out to show that actually the ear print did not so-called belong to this accused person, Mr. Delaher. So I don't think we are ever going to see ear prints being emitted in court. Fingerprint, yes, because it's very well tested, about loops and all that. No two finger prints are alike, and this is scientifically sound and tested. But we have not quite heard of two finger ear prints, being exactly matching, or so-called two persons not having similar kind of ear. So you know, so that's not something that is going to be introduced in court or accepted. Now, okay, this is just for you to remember. This is again what the court says, right? You must always present your underlying evidence and your analytical process. Right? This is important. Science must be introduced in an analytical way, right? With sound scientific principles and good sound basis. Now, okay, so one example that unfortunately a lot of times is psychiatry, because psychiatry is a very gray area, and courts now, and in court nowadays, defense persons like to call psychiatrists to introduce a lot of evidence that try to so-called exonerate the accused. So in this case, they try to call a psychiatrist to say that based on the psychosocial profile, you know, it's like what we call crime profiling. I don't know if you've seen this US detective series, you know, crime profiling. They can actually profile a criminal, a person, all right, by studying, say say from a series of murders. They can be able to tell, oh, the person who's likely to have committed a crime is a 36-year-old Anglo-Saxon male, you know, with maybe I don't know a limp on his left leg, and you know, sounds like Sherlock Holmes to me. But anyway, so similarly, the psychiatrists try to argue that based on the psychosocial profile, he was a severe heroin addict, and therefore he can consume only up to 8 sachets grams a day, right? And of course, absolutely, the court gave no evidence. Gave no weight to this kind of evidence called psychosocial profile. That based on this kind of profile, this guy is a severe heroin addict, right? So now, this is another area that's very problematic. How reliable are statistics? When you try to introduce statistics in court, it can actually prejudice a judge's mind. Yeah? So if, for example, you tell the court, say that, oh, based on my analysis or my study, all right, it is 1:150 chance, all right, that the accused, so it's 150-to-1 chance that the accused is the one who say drove the van, or you know. So when you say 150-to-1, it means that 150%, you know. So that's as good as more than 100%, which means when you use statistics like that, you're saying basically the guy is the so-called accused person, all right? I mean, or he's connected to the offense. So it's very dangerous. Let me just show you some cases where statistics poses problem. Okay, so this is what, right? Statistics can be misleading. Easy to lie with statistics, easier to lie without them, right? Now, this is one case. Okay, this is a case which I've been citing for the last 10 years. This is a very important case. Now, this case is called Natasha. You don't have to read the whole thing. This case came out, you can see the date, 1997, a very old case, right? But it shows the dangers of using statistics as a scientific tool. Now, what happened was this. Let's take a look. Okay, Natasha was accused, he was convicted of murder. Basically, he was alleged at the High Court, he was convicted of murder. Now, he was alleged to have run over the victim with his van, causing her death. Now, nobody saw the crime. Now, the only evidence was there were 6 tire ski marks found at the crime scene, right? And some tire marks on her body. So basically, you only have tire marks that was found on the crime scene. So what the prosecution did was that the prosecution called an expert to compare the tire prints found at the site with the accused van. Now, there were only 2 skid marks that bear some characteristics similar to that from the accused van. So the 2 skid marks, normally you look at the treads, right? The treading of the, because the wheels have treads. So over time, some, the wheels, some of the treads disappear, so you may have different so-called the characteristics of the wheel, all right, over time. So what happens on this expert looked at the tires, found these two skid marks with similarities with the accused van. Then he conducted a survey on cars parked in various car parks to determine the match probability of a vehicle with three characteristics of the accused van that matches the skid marks, right? So he found that it was 1 in 133. So he came to court and testified that the likelihood ratio given is that 133 times more likely that the marks, all right, found at the crime scene came from the accused van than from an unrelated van. So when you give a statistic like that, it's quite stunning. You're saying 133 times. This basically more than 100 times, So when you introduce this kind of evidence, basically you're trying to sway the court to say that, the likelihood is that the van was at the crime scene and the van belonged to the accused. Therefore, the accused is the one who drove and ran the van over the accused person's body. So of course the court don't buy it. I mean, anyway, the defense reached a separate conclusion. Obviously, they found another experts to say that these similarities are only possible, it cannot be compared. So basically what happened was that the court set certain guidelines for statistics, saying that if you want to use statistics, you cannot present statistics with this kind of large figures, 133 times or 1,000 times, and the court is going to say, look, by giving these statistics, you're trying to influence the court to rule in a certain way. So there must be very proper safeguards when you want to collect, you want to evaluate data, you want to present it in court. So what the court did was, just take a look. So basically, these are some of the rules that the court set out. Basically, it must be a true cross-section, the sample size, and the sample size must be large enough, right? Now, all the gentleman did was to take a few hundred cars, right? Sample size of a few hundred cars. And we all know that there are hundreds of thousands of vans in Singapore. So if you want to use just a few hundred and something cars as a sample size, obviously it is insufficient. So it would not have been would not have produced a proper cross-section comparison of cars to produce a reliable result. So basically, the court says, look, the sample size is just too few for the court to reach this kind of conclusion that is 133 times, right? So, okay, aside from that, in that particular case, there was also actually evidence that was being introduced. In fact, another interesting evidence that the prosecution tried to introduce was they tried to argue that because the defense argued that, he took about an hour because his argument was that his van stopped on the day in question, and around that time he was actually repairing his car, the engine, and he took about an hour to repair the engine. Now the prosecution introduced an expert to say that, based on the fact that he was a mechanic, he couldn't have taken an hour to so-called fix his car, therefore he's lying. And of course the court says that, look, this kind of evidence is the way to be given is going to be very little, because there are so many possibilities that can affect you, even a mechanic in repairing cars. Right? It may be, on a day the problem of the engine was much more severe than the normal, So there are so many factors that you can't say exactly how long it would take to so-called repair a car, right? So again, the prosecution's evidence in this nature was thrown out. The prosecution tried to introduce another piece of evidence, which was that, two fragments of the victim was found in the accused car, and the fragment matches the victim, right? And so he tried to argue that, because of that, the victim must have been killed in the back of the car, right? And then later the body was brought somewhere, and then he drove the van over the car. But of course, there was a lot of evidence to show that they were actually lovers, and because of that, they were having a lot of flings in the car even before the day in question. And she could have broken her tooth when she tried to, she had this habit of so-called opening bottles of drinks using her teeth. I don't know how many of you can do it. I surely can't do it. I'll probably chip, all my teeth before I can even open one bottle with, And some more in those old days, if you remember, or I think a lot of you are too young to really, nowadays you don't use you use plastic caps where you just simply turn and break. Last time it is actually a tin cap, which is cap on top, and you actually have to use that what was the can opener to actually pry off the, Of course, some people are so strong they use their teeth to do it, but I don't think you will want to. I don't think you want to try that. So anyway, so in that case, there was evidence to show that she was using her teeth to open, and therefore the teeth could have been broken in some earlier occasions. So again, this kind of evidence, again, trying to prove scientific evidence again was thrown out because there were other, what we call hypotheses, other possible reasons why this evidence was found there. Okay. Now, okay, this is a pretty sad case as well. It was in England. Sally Clark is again using statistics. So what happened is that what we call the SID, sudden infant death syndrome. It happens in Singapore in the past, I think quite often, that they were trying to find in studies where suddenly you find that infants die, and there was no apparent reason why the infants die. And so they call it an infant, the SID, sudden death infant syndrome, what they call it. Now, so this person, this lady, right, her first baby died, okay, found as natural cause. Then the second baby that was born very soon, 1 year later, also died. So 2 deaths, all right? And so the question was, how did both this baby die, okay? And the prosecution tried to argue that the babies died due to abuse by the Sally, which is the mother, right? Because the argument is that, if one baby died, understandable, it could be due to sudden death, but why 2 babies? I mean, 2 babies died, so soon after birth, very unnatural. So they try to argue that, the probability of 2 deaths is just too low. So what they did was they got okay, all right, they got what we call Professor Meadows, who consulted and then who gave this evidence that following a double death is transposed to the chance of the mother telling the truth being 1 is to 73 million. All right. I mean, she was convicted based on Professor Meadows' evidence. Let's see. This is what he said. 2 court deaths are 73 million to 1 chance. That means he's basically saying to have a second death is 73 million to 1 chance to have a second sudden death, right? It must have been due to intentional killing, all right? So he gives the example, it's 5 times smaller than the chance of winning the lottery. 1 sudden death, he says 1 sudden infant death, tragedy. 2 is suspicious, 3 is murder unless proven guilt otherwise. I mean, this kind of statistical evidence, it is just totally unsupported. So, and because of that, anyway, the Royal Statistical Society disagreed with the way Professor Meadows used this kind of statistic evidence, because there are so many factors that could explain why there was a second death in the family, especially if you look at the last sentence. There may be unknown genetic or other environmental factors that predispose certain families to sudden infant death syndromes, so that a second case is likely. That means it could be due to genetics. That's why the second baby also died. So you cannot use statistics in this way to try to argue that the second death is more likely due to murder or due to intentional killing. So because of that, her conviction was she was acquitted. So I think that shows how you've got to be careful when you try to use statistics as a scientific method in courts. Okay, this last few cases I'll just run through quickly because it's just talking about lack of quality control. So just got to make sure that if you are going to introduce scientific evidence in court, you've got to make sure that your chain of evidence, your so-called your collection of evidence must be properly done. So like in this case, this guy's DNA was mixed, right? They did not mark the tray properly, right? And then the tray used to contain this Adams body sample was reused for the rape victim sample. So basically there was a mixing of the samples and then created an error that suggested that he was his so-called DNA was found on the rape victim, which was not. So again, just so it's important for quality control when it comes to scientific evidence. Defective procedures, I will just run through quickly. This is an old case, basically saying that for drug cases, you've got to make sure that when you mix drugs to test the so-called quantity of drug inside, because most of drugs that are found on a person are not pure drugs. That means, for example, a packet of heroin, it normally may not be pure heroin. So they need to pound it, homogenize it to make sure they can calculate the weight, actual weight of the heroin from the so-called other compounds that make up the block or the mixture. So to do that, you have to be very careful in the way you do the homogenizing. This is an old case. In today's using today's so-called equipment, this is not likely to happen. So this old case is just to show you that basically laboratory processes must be sound, all right? So even if, let's say, you want to introduce drug evidence in court, you're going to make sure that so how the drug passes from the police to the analyst, to the scientific officer, all this must be properly documented. Okay. Now, can I just check with Rod? How much time do I have, Rod?
You have about 5 minutes, I guess.
Oh, really? Oh gosh.
Well,
okay.
We had some teething troubles at the beginning, so we started a bit late.
Okay. I'm so sorry. All right, I'll just quickly finish the last part. Okay, so this is another case I'd like to cite, but I'll just run through quickly. I did this case. This is what we call a POC case. So Dr. Michael Tay, this is a new scientific method as well. He tried to, what happened was that a child was thrown from the flat. So the question was, what was the child thrown over, or what did the child fall over from the flat? So the argument was that the accused threw the child over. So what Dr. Tay did was he used 325 kg bags of pork and then threw them over different floors. You can see that, and then you see where it landed. You can see the grid at the top, and wherever it landed, it will measure. For example, if a child is thrown, the pork will land. Not the pork. The supposed body will land further away, as evidenced by the pork experiment. Of course, actually, I had a lot of doubts over this experiment because to me it seems quite commonsensical that if you throw something, the body will obviously land further than if you drop somebody over the so-called parapet. But anyway, this evidence was introduced, and the judge actually, the judge accepted that based on Michael Tay's evidence, the child was thrown away by the accused person, rather than that what the accused person said, that she accidentally fell over, right, and just tripped over and just fell over the parapet. So based on that, the court actually accepted this evidence, right? See, basically a projecting force can only account for this. Okay, so found guilty. Okay, last case I would cite is just this case to show that all right, this Indian national, all right, she claimed that the employer chopped her hand. So there were a lot on the right hand. There were a lot of these injuries. So the evidence came from medical experts to say whether the injuries is it consistent with being chopped by the employer, or what the defense says are self-inflicted injuries. That means the injuries were inflicted by the accused herself. And the court found that the injuries were consistent with self-inflicted because they are classic, what we call hesitation cards. Now, I just have a background to give me a minute or two just to explain hesitation cards because I love to tell the story. Okay, for people who don't know what hesitation cards are, right? Hesitation cards are normally typical of people who inflict injuries on their hand or on their wrist, and this normally happens when they attempt suicide. Okay, hesitation cards happens when, for example, somebody wants to commit suicide, they take a knife, all right, and then they are very sad. I always say this. So the person will, example I'll give, for example, he will say, oh, like, well, does my boyfriend love me or not? Doesn't love me, then I'll cut. Loves me, okay, I won't cut. Then loves me, not, then I'll cut again. And then finally, I decide that he doesn't love me, then I'll inflict the most serious cut. So what happened is that basically self-inflicted cuts like that, because a person is not has a lot of hesitation. So the cuts are generally parallel in nature. So basically, you will find that there are a lot of very close cuts on the hand. So that's what we call hesitation cuts. So in this case, the court found that no, there were actually such cuts. So the court ruled in favor of the defense that the cuts were actually very close to one another and they were classic. So the court cannot rule out that the cuts were self-inflicted. Okay, so I shall not, the rest, okay, this, I think it's okay. Okay, I will skip this part. I mean, basically, I don't think this is quite needed. Okay, so yes, Rod, thank you very much. I have come to the conclusion. I hope I've been able to explain a bit about how useful scientific evidence can be in court, but at the same time, bear in mind that the court demands very strenuous, presentation of the evidence in court, cogent, sound underlying principles. You must be able to explain yourself. There are no other hypotheses that can attack your hypothesis. So this is something you have to bear in mind when you give evidence in court as an expert. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we do have just a couple of minutes in hand in case any students have questions. So anyone on Zoom can type it into the chat. But a couple of things occurred to me because you mentioned statistical evidence. So I was reading a story yesterday evening. This is a case in the UK.
Oh, okay.
About a nurse accused of murdering babies in the maternity ward.
Oh, okay.
And the basic evidence is that the babies are much more likely to die when she's on duty compared to when she's off duty.
So statistical evidence were introduced.
It's basically statistical evidence, yes.
And was she found guilty?
Case is ongoing.
Oh, I must read that. That would be very good.
I'll circulate the link to you and the class.
Okay, that would be very interesting. Yeah.
Then I have another question because you mentioned when expert witnesses act as hired guns. So lying to the court, which is perjury, is a criminal offense. Is there a possibility that a hired gun expert witness could actually be charged with perjury?
Well, the point is that most of the time, what the expert, how would I put it? When he presents the facts are there, so he's not really lying as to the facts. If he lies to the facts or he misleads the court or he's saying something which is not factually correct, then of course that can be perjury. But if he's giving an opinion, then of course it's very arguable. It's really how you read the evidence or how you read the facts, and you're trying to convince the judge that, say, based on this same facts, I'm reading it this way, but the other expert, based on the facts, is reading the other way. So if that is the case, then generally we don't charge the expert for perjury. But of course, if the expert give an evidence in obviously a very biased way, very biased manner, it's so clear that he's tailoring his opinion, when it's so obviously ridiculous and it's just tailoring his opinion in a certain way, then of course, normally what happens is the court will censure him in court. That's one thing. And the other way the court can, in a way, can punish him is that he can be referred to his professional, say, regulatory body. So, for example, a doctor, a complaint can be lodged with the SMC, the Singapore Medical Council, so that basically saying that this doctor has been giving very biased evidence in court. It's not true to his profession, not true to his duty to the court. Therefore, disciplinary action should be taken. So we see more of this kind rather than being charged in court, because really the facts are not the issue. Really, it's more the nature of the opinion. So I think that is normally what happens. So you will find experts being actually referred to their. So for example, a psychiatrist, I think he was referred to his a regulatory body, the psychiatric association or something, for them to take action. So that's normally what will happen.
Okay, so thank you for that. I don't see any questions from the students. No questions. I think they're all desperate to get either to their next class or to go home. I don't know which one.
Yeah, probably they had a full day, today.
I think that's probably what it is. So,
Okay.
So thank you once again for your lecture.
Yes, Rod, I think if next year I'm still doing it, I promise to be in person.
Okay, we hope to see you here in person next year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, I'll do that. Thank you very much.
Let's thank our speaker once more for his
Thank
lecture,
you.
those who are still here.
Thank you. Okay, goodbye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.